All right, yeah! Thank God for fantasy football. I'm Buster Brown, and the show is called Redemption Rehab. Today, we're taking a look at the weekly waiver wire report heading to week 4 of the NFL season, starting with this guy, Jawan Jennings, wide receiver for the San Francisco 49ers. He's only owned in 35% of fantasy football leagues, and last week he had 11 catches for 175 yards and 3 touchdowns on 12 targets. The reason he had such a good game is because George Kittle was out, Christian McCaffrey was out, Deebo Samuels was out. When these guys come back, unfortunately, he's probably not going to do as well. But if these guys are out next week, you need to go pick this guy up and get him in your lineup because he's going to have another big week. Who else do we like? How about this guy? Cole Kmet of the Chicago Bears. He's only owned in 35% of the leagues. If you need a tight end, go out and get Cole Kmet. He had 10 catches for 97 yards on 11 targets. And he had another touchdown. This is a big day for Cole Kmet. He's a good tight end. He's worth picking up. If he's available on your waiver wire, pick him up, get him in your lineup. Who else do we like? Why not Andy Dalton? He's a quarterback for the Carolina Panthers. He ended up having to take over the starting quarterback position because the quarterback wasn't doing very well. So Andy Dalton comes in, and last week for Carolina, he was 26 of 37 for 319 yards and 3 touchdowns, and he had a quarterback rating of 123. Look, if you're in a 2-quarterback league, or if you need a good quarterback this week because yours is banged up, maybe you had Tua Tagovailoa or maybe Jordan Love, hey, get Andy Dalton in there, man. He may help you win some games like he did last week against the Raiders. Who else do we like? Let's take a look at some running backs you need to know about for week 4 of the NFL season. Starting with Bucky Irvin of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Man, number 7 had another decent game. He's handcuffed to Rachaad White. Bucky Irvin's only owned in 35% of fantasy football leagues, so he might be on your waiver wire. Last week he was 9 rushes for 70 yards, and he also caught 2 passes for 17 yards on 3 targets. Guys I like on the radar, guys I might be picking up, how about Emmanuel Wilson, the Green Bay Packers? He's only owned in 25% of fantasy football leagues. He's the handcuff to Josh Jacobs. Actually had a better day than Josh Jacobs. Emmanuel Wilson had 12 carries for 50 yards, caught 2 balls for 35 yards, and a touchdown on 2 targets. Who else do we like? Hey, man, if you need a dart, how about Cam Akers down in Houston? With Joe Mixon hurt and Dameon Pierce banged up, this is the next guy available. He didn't do much. He only had 9 carries for 21 yards, but he did manage to catch a pass for 8 yards and score a touchdown. I'd be really careful with him. Other running backs we like this week, how about Roschon Johnson of the Chicago Bears? He had 8 carries for 30 yards, and he also caught 4 balls for 32 yards. He's only owned in 5% of fantasy football leagues. And how about Khalil Herbert on the same team with the Chicago Bears? These guys could be trade bait for a team that needs a running back. Last week, Khalil Herbert had 4 carries for 9 yards, and what I'm hearing is there's a lot of trade talk involved in these 2 guys. And then you got to look at the Denver backfield. Keep an eye out for Tyler Batty. Last week he was 9 carries for 70 yards. We also like Jaleel McLaughlin. We've been talking about him for a few weeks. He had 5 carries for 7 yards and a touchdown. And he managed to catch 1 pass for 7 yards on 1 target. And keep an eye out for Audric Estime, the rookie coming in to the Bronco backfield, and week 5 he's on an IR, and we really like this guy. We did a NFL draft preview show special on rookies coming into the league, and he's one of them. We'll put a link up so you can look at it in the description, and we'll also put up a link on the video if you're watching it on YouTube. Who else do we like? Remember these guys we talked about in the last couple weeks. We'll put up this list of guys that you should be looking at running back that we've talked about the last few weeks. Make sure you see if they're on your waiver wire. I mean, people like Brandon Allen's a must-have. Ty Chandler, Alexander Madison. These are guys that should not be on your waiver wire, and you should go out and get them. Samaje Perine, Carson Steele, Ray Davis, Kareem Hunt, and Clyde Edwards-Helaire. These guys are on your waiver wire. You need to go out, Get them, put them on your bench because they're going to produce at some point in this season. Let's go take some look at some other guys we really like this week. Okay, if you need a wide receiver, we've got a lot of guys. Look at this list of guys we put up the last 2 weeks, starting with Quentin Johnston, Wayne Dell Robinson, Alan Lazard, Jalen Tolbert, Josh Downs. How about Jalen Naylor over there in Minnesota? We've been telling you about him for a couple weeks. He's had 3 touchdowns in 3 games with the injury to Jordan Addison. And how about Andre Isavosis over there in Cincinnati? He's put up a bunch of touchdowns too. These are guys you need to know about and you need to put on your roster. A guy we haven't talked about much this year. How about Darnell Mooney, a wide receiver down there in Atlanta? He's owned in 50% of fantasy football leagues. He caught last week 8 catches for 66 yards on 8 targets versus Kansas City. I'd get him on my roster. Guys we want you to keep on your radar. These are guys you need to look at in case you want to pick them up. Calvin Austin of the Pittsburgh Steelers, man, he had 4 catches for 95 yards and a touchdown on 5 targets. He's only owned in 1% of fantasy football leagues. Put him on your radar. How about Demario Douglas over there in New England? He had 7 catches for 69 yards on 9 targets. He might be the go-to guy in New England. He also had 1 carry for 9 yards, and he was only owned in 20% of fantasy football leagues. How about this guy? We really like Trey Tucker over in Las Vegas. He's a wide receiver who had 7 catches for 96 yards and a touchdown on 9 targets. He's only owned in 2% of fantasy football leagues. And a guy we talked about in our NFL draft preview show at wide receiver, we said he was a sleeper pick. Xavier Leggett of Carolina Panthers. He had 2 catches for 42 yards on 3 targets. He's only owned in 2% of fantasy football leagues. And a wide receiver that's been around for a while, Greg Dortch down in Arizona. He had 3 catches for 35 yards on 6 targets, and he's only owned in 5% of fantasy football leagues. These are guys you should keep on your radar. Besides the guys we mentioned earlier, we'll be picking up, putting in our lineups week 4 of the NFL season. Okay, hey, maybe you're a guy that needs a tight end. We gave you some great tight ends you should have been looking at the last couple of weeks on Fantasy Football Redemption Rehab. How about like Mike Gesicki of the Cincinnati Bengals? This week he plays against Carolina. Or Zach Ertz of the Washington Commanders. This week he plays against the Arizona Cardinals. We told you about Brandon Strange down there in the Jags with the injury to Evan Ingram. These are guys that I'd be picking up, putting on my roster, possibly putting in my lineup. You can't forget about Tucker Kraft over there at Green Bay. If Jordan Love comes back, this is a guy that's going to have a big year. Tucker Kraft in Green Bay. Last week we told you about Tyler Conklin. He's a guy we would pick up and put on our roster. He plays for the New York Jets. He's only owned in 20% of fantasy football leagues. Last week he caught 5 passes for 93 yards on 6 targets. This week he plays Denver. Guys we put on our radar to make sure, keep an eye on what they're doing this year. How about number 87, Noah Fant out there in Seattle? He's only owned in 5% of fantasy football leagues. He caught 6 passes for 60 yards on 6 targets. This week he plays Detroit. And then speaking of Detroit, Sam Laporta has an ankle injury, might not play this week. So who's his backup? Brock Wright. He's only owned in 1% of fantasy football leagues. Last week with Sam Laporta injured, he caught 4 passes for 34 yards on 5 targets. This week he plays Seattle. And another guy you got to keep on your radar, how about Cade Otton in Tampa? He's only owned in 5% of fantasy football leagues. Last week he caught 7 passes for 47 yards on 8 targets. This week he plays the Philadelphia Eagles. Look, if you need a tight end, these are guys you can go out, pick up, put on your radar or put on your bench, and it may help you win a game. I mean, look, there are tight ends out there that aren't doing anything, and were drafted early in a lot of leagues. So if you need a tight end, you're getting tired of getting a donut from a Mark Andrews, go out and pick up one of these guys, put them on your bench, even possibly start them, get some points, win some weeks. Who else do we like? How about these guys? Maybe you're a guy that needs a quarterback. These are the guys we mentioned the last couple of weeks. Geno Smith's only owned in 35% of leagues. He plays for Seattle. Last week he was 26-34 for 289 yards and a touchdown. We told you last week also about Sam Darnold. He's only owned in 20% of fantasy football leagues. He had 4 touchdowns versus Houston and a quarterback rate of 119. And we told you earlier about Andy Dalton of the Carolina Panthers. These are guys that be going up, picking up, and possibly starting in my lineup. Guys you got to keep your radar on. How about Malik Willis over there in Green Bay? If Jordan Love's out again, last week for Green Bay, Malik Willis completed 13 of 19 passes for 202 yards, and he scored a touchdown. He also rushed the ball 6 times for 73 yards and another touchdown, and he had a quarterback rating of 121. A guy you want to keep on your radar? How about this guy over in Miami? I mean, the injury to Skylar Thompson isn't doing well. They picked up Tyler Huntley off the practice squad for the Baltimore Ravens. This guy's a former Pro Bowler, and he can run the ball. He can pass the ball, and I think exactly what Miami needs to win a game this week. Tyler Huntley. Hey, if you need a defense, how about Tennessee, man? They're playing Miami with the issues with the quarterback, issues in Miami. How about you go out and get yourself some Tennessee Titans if you absolutely have to have a decent defense? And how about a good kicker? You want a good kicker? How about this guy? How about Cario Santos over there in Chicago? He plays the Rams. And how about Jason Myers over in Seattle? He plays the Detroit Lions. Look for those guys to kick up a few field goals each, score you maybe double digits fantasy points. Okay, that's it for the weekly waiver wire report for week 4 of the NFL season. If you like what you saw, hit the subscribe button. Anyways, I'm Buster Brown. The show is called Redemption Rehab. Good luck.